Warm welcome to all of the subscribers of the Global Energy Association. This is the continuation of our magnificent series with people who've been shortlisted for this year's prize. And today we have a guest whose name I can pronounce easily because he's a Slav, Petrom Zelenaem. Although I'd imagine, Dr. Zelenaem, that your surname must be misinterpreted as mine is on many occasions in America where you work now.
Yeah, my name is being often pronounced as Zelenaem. We pronounce it Zelenaem, but actually my last name is Hungarian. It's not even Polish.
Ah, well, my problem is that, everyone knows me as Mr. Brilev, Dr. Brilev, although in Russian it is, of course, pronounced like Brilov, but I'm so used to it that I don't actually correct people, bit like as they pronounce. Now, you've been nominated for pioneering contributions, I'm quoting here, to fundamental research, technology development, and commercial production of fuel cell catalysts and devices. Now, if you win and you go to that stage, the audience there, the professional one, would immediately understand what we are talking about. But for those people who are not scientists, who are not involved in this research, how would you explain in simple terms, what are we talking about when we say catalyst in a fuel cell and why it is so important?
We can perhaps start with the fuel cell itself.
Okay.
So fuel cell is a converter, really. It's a converter for chemical energy into electrical energy directly. So without being limited by the Carnot cycle. So in other words, because of that, overcoming that limitation, fuel cells can reach very high energy conversion efficiencies. So an internal combustion engine can reach efficiencies at the level of 30–40%, perhaps in some cases. Fuel cells theoretically can reach efficiency very close to 100%. So the fuel cells are capable of converting chemical energy of the fuel. Could be, typically it's hydrogen, but it can be methanol, for example, or some other fuels, which are directly electrochemically combusted within the fuel cell itself, generating electricity. Fuel cell, like batteries, is not an energy storage device or electricity storage device, but it's just converter. It works when the fuel is fed into it and stops working when the fuel stops being delivered to it. That is actually a significant advantage because there is no need to recharge a fuel cell. It's ready immediately to deliver electricity as soon as we start delivering fuel to it. Now, there are two electrochemical processes occurring in the fuel cell. Two electrodes. One is called the anode, at which the fuel is oxidized.
Thanks for repeating the secondary school stuff, but it's important for our viewers. It is.
And the other one is called the cathode, at which oxygen from air is reduced. So the overall reaction occurring in the fuel cell is the same as a combustion of the fuel under regular conditions. However, as I mentioned before, with a very high efficiency. So the biggest challenge, of course, and the ultimate target is to make fuel cell as efficient as possible, which means to operate, to have the two catalysts and the two electrodes, the anode and the cathode, operate with the max at the lowest possible so-called overpotentials. So as close to theoretical thermodynamic operating potentials as possible. So the most important for fuel cell performance, there are some other factors which we can talk about, but we don't have to, is to make catalysts as good a catalyst as possible for one and the other electrode.
And that's where the magic starts.
That's where the magic starts. Yes. So we are talking, in my case at least, about so-called polymer electrolyte fuel cells operating at relatively low temperatures, typically around 80 degrees C. We are also talking about a hydrogen oxygen or hydrogen air fuel cell, with hydrogen being the fuel. This is the most common fuel, generating the higher power densities from the fuel cell or fuel cell stacked in larger systems. So hydrogen is being oxidized at the anode, and the oxygen is being reduced at the cathode. As far as the anode process is concerned, hydrogen oxidation, at least in acidic fuel cells, they could be alkaline as well, hydrogen oxidation is a very fast electrochemical process. Because it is so fast, because of the very fast kinetics, hydrogen, we do not need much catalyst to oxidize hydrogen. On the cathode, however, we require significant amounts of catalyst because oxygen reduction is a very slow process under electrochemical conditions. In both cases, the reference catalysts, the incumbent catalysts, if you like, are based on platinum, or it is just platinum. Because hydrogen oxidation is, as I said, a fast process, we require minute amounts of platinum to generate current densities required. At the cathode, because oxygen reduction is slow, we require much more catalyst, platinum-based or just platinum. In the practical systems, these are often platinum transition metal alloys, such as platinum cobalt, for instance.
You must have a lot of platinum cards in your pocket.
Yeah, well, right now the price of platinum is lower than it used to be in some cases.
Yes, it is.
It's around $1,000 per ounce, troy ounce, but I think in the past it was as expensive as $2,500 per troy ounce.
Let me ask you a very strange question. Both you and I are from former communist countries. I understand that you've been working in the States since late 90s. So I'll ask you a question which you immediately recognize, because I'm sure that you have the same experience. When and where did you get your first credit card? A Visa. In the States, presumably.
Actually, it wasn't a Visa.
Oh, the MasterCard. Doesn't matter. I'm not going to publicize
it. MasterCard.
Yes, but you got it, presumably, you received it, you obtained it in America.
In America, that's correct.
Okay, my case was I received my first ever plastic in the UK. After which you went home, surely, to Poland, as I did to Russia. And you enter a shop and you want to buy something, and then you realize that this is still a cash economy. As you will remember, in the 90s, very rapidly, cards substituted cash. But there was this period of time when you were coming from the West with the cards, and people were looking at this card, realizing, hell, this man has got the money, but he can't stand it in my shop, so that I must put this little machine which reads the cards. This is the egg and chicken question about what comes first, a card in your pocket or this little machine in the shop which reads it. I will now reinterpret this question, having in mind hydrogen.
Yeah.
What will come first, a supply of a hydrogen car or a hydrogen petrol station?
What will come first?
Yes. Well, what do you create first? An infrastructure?
I think I would. The question often asked is, what should come first? Should that be infrastructure, that's hydrogen filling station, or should that be the fuel cell itself or fuel cell car? I think they need to come together, because one cannot be without the other. From the technology point of view, I think that the fuel cell car, ultimately fuel cell system, was ready before the infrastructure. And right now we have fuel cell powered cars as commercial products, but their market introduction is limited by the lack of the infrastructure.
The reason I'm asking this question is that this video session that we're having now isn't between Russia and the United States. Well, the United States obviously being the richest country in the world, etc., but Russia is also in the north of this planet, where infrastructure is being built, where people think about modern technologies. But a lot of our viewers right now are in the developing world. How viable, how conceivable are all these ideas, not just in the rich corner of the world, but also in the south?
I think they are conceivable. I think the south may have certain advantage, which we know from the introduction of cell phones, for instance, where the lack of classical or old telephone infrastructure allowed the south, or many southern countries, to bypass the
landline era.
The line of, the stationary phone infrastructure. And I think that, like in many other cases, it's a matter of cost. If the cost is brought down to the level comparable to that of generating the cost of hydrogen, especially of generating petrol or gasoline, as we would say here in the US.
Or you sometimes even say gas, which is absolutely confusing. But anyway,
this is confusing. Of course, not for people who are used to talking in those terms. But I think it's once the cost parity is reached, I don't think it's going to be a big problem, because at some point you just need to make a decision which fuel you are committing to.
You occupy in this research a very interesting corner, which is very important for a lot of people in the United States, in Russia, in Northern Europe, who are involved in oil and gas exploration. Because the more these days, the more they hear about the climate change, etc., the more they are afraid, the more afraid they are of a perspective on this danger on the horizon of theirs, that solar panels, windmills, etc., will substitute the traditional thing. As far as the hydrogen is concerned, there are several ways of obtaining it, right? You can do it in a very old fashion, which I think is disappearing, coal. You can extract it from natural gas, or you could even use these very modern technologies of getting it out of water, obviously, using the electricity produced in turn in the alternative energy sector. There are all sorts of these things. Well, your research is, of course, not about the industrial production, but you know how it works. Do you think the oil and gas industry will survive in the hydrogen era, if it ever comes?
See, I may not have enough knowledge to answer this question. Obviously, that there is a danger for that particular industry to become less important. But also there is obviously a benefit that certain areas of energy generation will become less dependent. I don't know if that industry is going to survive. I think as far as the source of chemicals.
Oh, this is obvious. Yes.
Oh, this is obvious. It will survive. As a major supplier of fuels for cars and electricity generation, etc., the importance of that in industry will ultimately will become less. So that industry needs, and in many cases has already started looking into becoming more involved in clean, so-called clean energy generation.
But what about hydrogen in particular? Do you think the major source of industrial hydrogen will be the natural gas, or
right?
there's no?
Of course, vast major. hydrogen is a byproduct for many synthesis processes. And it is effectively generated from fossil fuels. There is no question about it. The interesting aspect of it is, though, that even though it is generated still from fossil fuels, the use of hydrogen allows to increase so-called well-to-wheels efficiency because of the high efficiency of the electricity generation once you have the fuel.
No.
Okay, so that is something which is often not realized, but
I didn't realize that, to be honest with you.
But the ultimate target of so-called hydrogen economy is obviously to generate hydrogen from so-called clean sources, like you mentioned. That would be obviously solar, wind, or combination of the two, like pursued in Germany now.
Well, we'll see. We are, of course, a scientific question, but, you know, because we speak a lot with the people from the industry, I feel certain solidarity. So for me, this is another question, of course, but for me, the question of sustainable development is about creating new technologies and making energy, of course, more affordable and more accessible, but also about, if not keeping the old-fashioned jobs, then, you know, recreating them. So, well, you know, I know the coal miners thing in Poland. I have a lot of friends in the coal industry here in Russia. Yes, the technologies have changed, believe it or not, but in the Soviet times, in the communist times, there was more than 1 million coal miners in the USSR. These days, in Russia only, there are 150,000, and they produce more coal than they used to do in the Soviet times. So technologies change. But of course, people look at coal with suspicion. But people look at hydrogen with suspicion as well. You know, the first image in an educated mind, which comes to an educated mind, is the Hindenburg dirigible, as they were called back then, exploding. What do you say to that?
Well, you see, the energy content of hydrogen is comparable to that of gasoline, or petrol, if you like, in British or European terms. So I think that in one case we are dealing with gas, in the other case we are dealing with a liquid fuel. Both have a very high energy content, especially gasoline, actually. So I think it's perhaps a different set of precautions we need to use with hydrogen versus gasoline, but ultimately we just need to be careful. Without high energy content, the fuel offers very little value.
Okay, I've deliberately made this conversation more understandable for wider audiences. But now let us imagine that we're not being listened by wider audiences, and you address your fellow scientists. I'd imagine that in the next minute or so, the only thing I'm going to be understanding is off, about, if, etc., and all of the words will be from outer space. But when you meet your fellow scientists, what is the main challenge in your sphere of interests? What are you talking about? What's the thing that you must overcome?
Well, and so I probably need to pick up where we left off when we started.
Yes, absolutely.
So we started talking about the fuel cell and the catalyst and the cost of catalysts because they are platinum based. Again, we are talking about polymer electrolyte fuel cells. There are many other types of fuel cells, but we can talk about too. The biggest challenge right now in general is the cost, and it's not very surprising.
This is understandable.
Yeah, and the other cost is durability of all those new systems. When it comes to hydrogen, oxygen fuel cell, hydrogen and fuel cell for automotive transportation, which has been the main focus of our research here in Los Alamos, Los Alamos Fuel Cell Program, which, by the way, has been around the longest in the world, I think. It started in the early 1970s during the first oil crisis and has continued ever since. Okay. So So the challenge is the cost because of the precious metal involved in generating electricity. To what degree it's a challenge? So we combine single fuel cells into fuel cell stack, containing many fuel cells to generate sufficient power in the fuel cell powered car. So the cost of platinum needed in the current automotive fuel cell system represents close to 40% of the fuel cell stack cost. Even at that low cost of platinum I already mentioned, with an introduction of fuel cell cars into the market, the demand is going to drive the cost of platinum up. Increase in the volume is not going to help in this case because the precious metal market is not subject to the economies of scale.
No, this is good news for Russia, which is a major platinum producer. So go on.
So what we need to do is to reduce the amount, and we as a community have been doing that for years now by reducing the amount of platinum. That turned out to be very successful, to the point that now you can buy in certain parts of the world with hydrogen, some kind of hydrogen infrastructure in place, you can buy fuel cell cars. There are 3 passenger cars available in the market, made by Toyota first, then Honda and Hyundai now. So one approach is to reduce the amount of platinum. That amount of platinum has been reduced through different means. The other way is, of course, to replace platinum altogether with non-platinum catalysts, especially at the cathode we already talked about. And this is what I am doing. We've been doing, and other people in the field have been doing, developing so-called non-platinum group metal catalysts or platinum group metal free catalysts.
Like what?
So in our case, this has been carbon-based catalysts. These are catalysts which are typically based on high surface area carbon, doped with nitrogen, and transition metals in relatively low quantities. But these are transition non-precious metals, obviously. And most commonly it's iron, but it could be cobalt, manganese in some cases. In these metals, active sites are created, supposedly involving the transition metal, coordinated by nitrogen, which show significant activity in oxygen reduction reaction. So this is the reaction which in the fuel cell is taking place at the cathode, and requires large quantities of platinum, which drive up the cost of the fuel cell stack.
Well, all I can say at this stage is that 15 scientists from all over the world, Australia, Denmark, the United States, China, etc., have been selected by our technical experts for the shortlist, which will be looked at by the International Committee on the 7th of September, and then announced will be on the 8th, the names of the winners. And all I can say at this stage, that it's going to be a tough decision for the International Committee, because the more I speak to our nominees, the more impressed I am. Well, congratulations on your research, Peter. And please stay on our orbit. I wish luck to all of the nominees, of course. We'll see what the International Committee decides, but let's keep in touch. Thank you so much.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure talking with you.
Likewise. Thank you.
Thank you.